The invasion that chose US back. They said the galaxy didn't lose wars. It simply stopped fighting them. That was the official line from the coalition of 900 civilizations, spoken in polished diplomatic tones over encrypted channels that dripped with centuries of arrogance. Entire species that had mastered gravity manipulation, neural warfare, and star-harvesting economies looked down at one pale blue world circling a mediocre sun and marked it with a single classification. Pre-ascension. Non-threat. Suitable for resource acquisition. Earth didn't even warrant a proper invasion fleet. Just a compliance delegation. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was sending it. The sky over Karachi split open like a wound in glass. Not dramatic at first, no cinematic thunder, no apocalyptic trumpet. Just a faint distortion, like reality itself had hiccuped. Then came the ships, 6 of them, descending with the confidence of landlords arriving to evict tenants who had already signed the papers. People filmed it. Of course they did. Some laughed. Some prayed. Some placed bets on whether it was a hoax, a drill, or another government distraction from collapsing economies. Then one of the ships spoke. Not through sound. Through thought. Every human mind within 1,000 kilometers heard the same thing at the same time. Earth is hereby incorporated into the coalition resource grid. Resistance is uneconomic. That was when humanity stopped laughing. Because something inside that transmission didn't just sound alien. It sounded certain. Like a predator explaining math to prey. The first human response came from a Pakistani air defense operator named Farid Qureshi, who had been eating cold biryani at his console when the sky tore open. He stared at the impossible geometry hovering above the city and said calmly into the microphone, "Command, do we still have authorization for unknown aerial targets?" A pause. Then higher command answered, "Engage at discretion." Farid nodded like he'd been waiting his whole life for that sentence. "Good," he said. "Because I was getting bored." And he fired. The missile system didn't expect to work. Nobody did. Not really. The world had spent decades building weapons for deterrence, not usage. But the Earth still remembered how to fight, even if it pretended otherwise. The first missile struck the nearest alien ship dead center. There was no explosion. Just a pause. Like the universe itself was confused. Then the alien vessel flickered, its outer shielding collapsing not outward, but inward, as if reality had folded in on itself. It fell. Not gracefully. Not controllably. It dropped like a stone that had suddenly been told it was heavy. It hit the outskirts of the city and erased 3 districts in a silence so complete that witnesses later described it as loud in their bones. For 7 seconds, nobody spoke. Then every human military channel lit up at once. Because the coalition fleet had made its second mistake. They had assumed humans were unified under fear. Instead, humans unified under opportunity. And under something far worse. Recognition. Across continents, old systems that were supposed to be decommissioned suddenly activated. Cold War bunkers in Russia opened like waking beasts. Desert silos in North America hummed awake like irritated gods. Submarines beneath the Pacific silently changed course without permission. And in orbit, hidden behind debris, corporate satellites, and defunct research platforms, things that were never supposed to exist began transmitting again. One alien observer, aboard the flagship Varelian Accord, watched the data feed spike and whispered, "This is impossible. Their technological level is static. They should not be coordinating." Another replied colder, "They are not coordinating." A pause. "Then what are they doing?" The answer came moments later from Earth itself. A broadcast, unencrypted, public, and deliberately ancient in its communication style. It came from a human woman sitting in a bunker somewhere beneath the Ural Mountains. Her face was calm. Her uniform unmarked. Her voice carried the weight of a species that had been waiting, not panicking. Waiting. She looked directly into the alien transmission relay and said, "You came without asking?" A pause. "We remember that kind of visitor." Then she smiled, not kindly. Not warmly. Like someone reopening an old wound just to make sure it still bled. So we chose war. The alien fleet registered confusion. That word, chose, did not align with any survival model. War was supposed to be reactionary, defensive, economically inefficient. Choice implied agency. And agency implied unpredictability. Unpredictability, in coalition doctrine, was classified as a contagious anomaly. The Varelian Accord initiated containment protocols. Too late. Because Earth had already stopped behaving like a single planet. It started behaving like a memory. Old treaties humans had signed with themselves, never with aliens, activated in sequence. Defense pacts between nations that had spent decades pointing missiles at each other suddenly redirected those same missiles upward. And something else woke up. Something buried deeper than governments. Deeper than militaries. The off-record archives. The black projects that had been terminated. The wars that had never been admitted. Farid Qureshi watched his radar screen go from chaos to orchestration in under 90 seconds and whispered, almost reverently, "Oh, so that's what we were hiding." The alien fleet began its countermeasure assault. Energy lances sliced downward like divine judgment. Entire sections of atmosphere ignited as shielding fields strained and fractured. Cities vanished under beams that bent light itself into apology. And still, Earth kept responding. Not evenly. Not safely. Not logically. A nuclear detonation erupted in near orbit, not from a launch, but from something already there. A dormant platform that had been orbiting for 30 years under a fake telemetry signature finally woke up and said simply, "Target acquired." The first alien admiral to understand what was happening did so too late. He stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching human responses escalate not linearly, but historically. He saw relic weapons and future prototypes firing in the same engagement. He saw nations that no longer trusted each other suddenly behaving like organs of a single organism. And he realized something that made his mandibles tighten. "They are not a pre-ascension species," he said quietly. "No," his tactical officer agreed. "They are a post-conflict species pretending to be pre-ascension." The admiral turned slowly. "That is not possible." The tactical officer hesitated. "Unless their history is not finished." Outside the ship, another human missile struck. This one didn't target the fleet. It targeted the space between the fleet. And space broke. Not explosively. Structurally. Like a sentence suddenly losing grammar mid-word. The alien formation collapsed as navigation systems screamed impossibility. 3 ships vanished entirely, not destroyed, but displaced, thrown into coordinates that no longer existed in any mapped reality. The coalition flagship issued a full retreat order. That was when Earth did something that would later be described in alien records as psychologically obscene. It stopped defending. And started pursuing. Farid Qureshi leaned back in his chair, watching the retreat vectors bloom across his screen like fleeing insects. He took a sip of cold tea, frowned, and said, "They came all this way." A pause. Then he smiled slightly. "And didn't even knock properly." Above the burning sky, humanity's forgotten war machines began to turn. Not toward survival. Toward payback. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, the invaders realized they were not the hunters. They were the opening act. Earth does not negotiate with fire. The coalition fleet had fought wars across 7 spiral arms. They had shattered moon cities with mathematical precision. They had rewritten atmospheres into toxic sculptures. They had turned entire species into cautionary genetic archives. They had never, in all that time, retreated from a planet. Yet here they were, falling back from Earth like something had grabbed them by the spine and reminded them what fear felt like. The Varelian Accord burned through low orbit, its shields flickering under pressure it could not model. Every tactical prediction loop returned the same conclusion. Unknown response class, humanity. Which was not a useful classification. Not in war. Not in anything. Inside the command chamber, Admiral Sarah stood motionless while holographic readouts screamed around him. His officers spoke in overlapping panic. "They're not using unified command structures. They're not following escalation ladders. They're launching obsolete weapons in coordinated timing patterns. That's impossible. Obsolete systems decay within decades. Unless they maintain them." A silence cut through the bridge. Sareth finally spoke. "Why would a pre-ascension species maintain obsolete war infrastructure?" No one answered quickly enough. So he answered himself. "Because they expected someone to come back for them." Far beneath the battlefield, Earth's response network continued to unfold like a trap revealing its teeth. In what used to be called civilian airspace, old satellite grids shifted positions that had been mathematically forbidden under modern orbital safety standards. Those rules no longer mattered. They had been written for peace. And peace had just been classified as optional. A transmission crackled across Coalition channels again. The same human woman. Same bunker. Same calm eyes. But now there was something else behind her expression. Not anger. Not fear. Something colder. Familiarity. "You're not the first," she said. That line hit the alien bridge harder than any kinetic strike. Sareth leaned forward slightly. "Explain." The woman tilted her head, almost amused. "You always ask that." She gestured off-screen. A door opened behind her. Another human entered, older, scarred, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, holding what looked like a rusted metal cylinder. He set it down. The camera zoomed. The Coalition analysts froze. Because the cylinder was not obsolete. It was ancient doctrine made physical. A sealed launch authorization casing from a war that had never been publicly acknowledged even in human archives. Sareth felt something unfamiliar crawl along his instincts. Curiosity. The woman continued. "You think you found a quiet species? A soft one. A managed one." A pause. "We did that on purpose." The alien tactical net spiked. "What does that mean?" Sareth demanded. The woman smiled again. It wasn't warmth. It was permission. "It means," she said, "we got tired of being interrupted." The transmission cut. Instantly. No warning. No encryption handshake. Just gone. And that, more than anything else, terrified the Coalition fleet. Because it meant Earth was no longer speaking to them. It was speaking past them. Sareth turned sharply. "Track the origin of that bunker." "Already attempting," his systems officer replied. "Signal is—" He stopped. The hologram shifted. Every known Earth facility marker blinked. Then reorganized. Not by geography. By intent. "What is that?" someone whispered. The analyst swallowed. "That's impossible. They're grouping infrastructure by combat doctrine compatibility." Sareth's mandibles tightened. "Meaning?" The analyst hesitated. "Meaning Earth isn't defending territory. A beat. It's assembling armies." And then the first human counteroffensive hit space proper. It did not arrive like a fleet. It arrived like a correction. Coalition sensor arrays picked up dozens of mass signatures emerging from planetary orbit shadows, asteroid belts, and debris fields. Ships that had no clean manufacturing signatures. Hulls built from layered contradictions, old Earth alloys reinforced with materials that should not have existed in any civilian supply chain. One Coalition lieutenant whispered. "They built warships in silence." Sareth corrected him instantly. "No." A pause. "They built silence as cover for warships." The first engagement lasted exactly 90 seconds. Not because the Coalition lost. Because they stopped understanding what they were fighting. Human vessels did not behave like Coalition doctrine predicted. They did not exchange fire in clean arcs. They did not retreat when shield thresholds dropped. They did not preserve formation integrity. They adapted in real time using emotional feedback loops. One Coalition cruiser was disabled not by firepower, but by a coordinated sequence of electromagnetic pulses that mimicked its own communication signature, causing its internal systems to believe they were under friendly fire. Another was crippled when human ships detonated empty space near it, collapsing its navigation heuristics into recursive error states. A third simply stopped functioning after receiving a broadcast containing every recorded language on Earth simultaneously spoken in reverse. The Coalition had built war machines. Humanity had built confusion engines. On the bridge of the Varelian Accord, alarms began to feel redundant. Sareth watched a human fighter wing carve through 3 of his destroyers like they were following choreography. And then he noticed something that made his entire worldview fracture. They were laughing. Not all of them. But enough. Comms channels intercepted fragments. Told you the old railguns still had teeth. Pay back for Karachi, let's go. No, you don't get to retreat after that. One voice cut through clearer than the rest. Calm. Older. Worn like steel left in salt water. Command, target confirmed. Proceeding with Doctrine Black. Sareth froze. Did they just say Doctrine Black? His tactical officer hesitated. There is no Coalition record of that designation. Sareth turned slowly. Find it anyway. But even as he said it, he already understood the problem. Some things are not recorded. Because recording them means admitting they happened. And humanity had a long history of deleting its own mistakes. Outside the flagship, space itself began to shimmer. Not with weapons fire. With arrival. Something massive was unfolding beyond standard detection ranges. Coalition sensors struggled to resolve it, like trying to focus on a memory that didn't want to be remembered. Then it stabilized. And every alien bridge across the fleet fell silent. Because Earth had finally deployed something that was not built for war. It was built for ending them. Sareth whispered, barely audible. What did they just wake up? On the human side, Farid Qureshi watched his screen turn from tactical chaos into structured annihilation patterns he did not recognize from any training manual. He frowned. This isn't in our playbooks, he muttered. Behind him, a voice answered. That's because it was never meant to be read by you. Farid turned. An officer he didn't recognize stood in the doorway. No insignia. No name tag. Just tired eyes. How long have we had this? Farid asked. The officer looked at the screen. Long enough to hope we never needed it. A distant explosion rippled through orbit. The officer added softly. Now we know better. And above Earth, the Coalition fleet realized the second truth too late. They had not triggered a war. They had triggered a recall. Doctrine Black. The Coalition had survived extinction events. That was part of their pride. Their identity. Their political myth stitched across centuries of conquest. They did not fear resistance. They catalogued it. They did not fear adaptation. They countered it. What they feared, what no Coalition strategist ever admitted aloud, was a system that no longer behaved like a system. And Earth had just become exactly that. On the bridge of the Varelian Accord, Admiral Sareth stood in a silence that felt heavier than the ship's own gravity plating. Tactical holograms flickered around him like dying stars. Human vessels were no longer scattered contacts. They were forming a lattice. Not a fleet. A pattern. Explain Doctrine Black, Sareth ordered again. His intelligence officer's voice was strained. There is no formal entry in Coalition archives. Then it is human terminology. Sareth snapped. Translate. The officer hesitated. Then, quietly. It appears to refer to escalation beyond political authorization. A pause. Civilian override of strategic governance. The bridge went still. Sareth turned slowly. That is not a doctrine, he said. That is mutiny on a planetary scale. A new alarm spiked. Admiral, another officer said, voice tight. Human signatures are converging on our position. They're accelerating. How many ships? The officer swallowed. That's the issue, sir. We're no longer counting ships. A beat. We're counting formations. Space beyond the fleet warped again. But this time, it wasn't human weapons that arrived first. It was a broadcast. Every coalition channel. Every encrypted layer. Every hardened military frequency. All of them overwritten at once. And the voice that came through was not the bunker woman. It was older. Male. Tired in a way that suggested it had survived things that never made it into history books. You came to a quiet world, the voice said. A pause. We worked very hard to make it look that way. Sareth clenched his mandibles. Identify yourself. A faint chuckle came through the channel. You wouldn't have a classification for me. Another pause. But you might recognize the results of my work. Coalition sensors spiked violently. A massive energy signature just outside detection range folded into reality. Not a ship. Not a fleet. A construct. Built from layered orbital debris, decommissioned stations, and structures that had no business still existing. It moved like something assembled by necessity rather than design, an industrial god stitched together from forgotten human infrastructure. One analyst whispered, "That's not military." Another answered immediately, "It is now." The construct rotated slowly toward the Coalition flagship. And then, softly, "We called it Doctrine Black because we stopped writing it down after the first time." Sareth felt something unfamiliar again. Not fear. Not yet. Understanding approaching too late to be useful. "Fire!" he ordered. Coalition beams struck the construct. It did not react like armor. It reacted like memory. Parts of it failed. Other parts adapted. Entire sections detached, reformed, and re-entered function in new configurations within seconds. What had been damaged became redesign. The construct advanced. Human ships followed behind it. Not firing wildly. Not panicking. Moving with a discipline that felt older than their civilization had any right to possess. And then Sareth saw it. The pattern. The humans weren't improvising. They were replaying. Battle sequences that had been tested, failed, refined, and archived across centuries of conflict were now being deployed simultaneously. Desert warfare doctrine merged with orbital strike protocols. Submarine stealth tactics blended into void navigation logic. Urban insurgency models translated into fleet maneuvering. It wasn't a fleet. It was a composite organism made of every war humanity had ever fought. And the Coalition had just become the environment it was designed for. Sareth stepped back from the tactical display. "No species survives that many refinements," he said quietly. His intelligence officer replied, even quieter. "Unless they were never allowed to stop refining." Across the battlefield, human comms began to bleed through again. This time clearer. A younger voice. Laughing. "Hey, did anyone tell them we're not even at full doctrine yet?" Another voice replied. "Don't scare them off too early." Sareth's head snapped up. "Not full doctrine," he repeated. The analyst looked pale. "Sir? I think they're referring to internal escalation tiers. We're only seeing mid-level engagement protocols." Sareth stared at the advancing construct. "This is mid-level?" The construct fired. But not like a weapons system. Like a verdict. Coalition shielding collapsed across 3 ships in sequence, not by brute force, but by synchronized resonance disruption, each strike timed precisely to exploit the micro-instability between shield regeneration cycles. A destroyer broke apart silently, its structure folding inward like paper caught in invisible hands. Then another. Then another. And still the humans advanced. On the flagship, Sareth finally did something he had not done in his entire career. He requested withdrawal authorization. His tactical officer froze. "Admiral." Sareth didn't look away from the battlefield. "We are not losing tactically," he said. A pause. "We are losing conceptually." That was when Earth escalated again. Every surviving human ship halted simultaneously. Perfect synchronization. No lag. No signal delay. No visible command chain. And then the construct stopped as well. For the first time since the engagement began, silence returned to space. Coalition systems flagged it immediately. A pause in aggression. A potential negotiation window. Sareth narrowed his eyes. They're offering terms. The bunker voice returned. No. A pause. We're offering understanding. A new object appeared on Coalition sensors. Small. Single occupant. Unarmed. A shuttle. Drifting forward through the wreckage like it had permission to exist there. Sareth watched it approach. Intercept? An officer asked. Sareth hesitated. Then, no. The shuttle docked. And the airlock opened. One human stepped out. Middle-aged. Unarmed. No helmet. Just a worn uniform and the expression of someone who had already decided what kind of day this was going to be. He looked at the alien bridge crew and said, "Which one of you is in charge of not understanding us?" No one spoke. So he nodded, like that was answer enough. "Good," he said. "Then we can skip introductions." Sareth stepped forward slowly. "You are violating Coalition engagement protocol," he said. The human tilted his head. "Son," he replied calmly, "you stopped having protocols the moment you fired on a planet that remembers war." A pause. Then, quieter. "You didn't invade Earth. You rang a bell. And now you're surprised the whole house woke up." The silence that followed was not tactical. It was philosophical collapse. The house that woke up. The Coalition bridge did not recover quickly from the human's presence. Not because he was threatening. He wasn't. He stood there like a man waiting for a train that had already missed its schedule by a century, calm in a way that didn't match the scale of what was happening outside the hull. It was that mismatch that broke people. Sareth studied him carefully. "You boarded a Coalition flagship during active engagement," the Admiral said slowly. "Unarmed." The human shrugged slightly. "If I needed a weapon to be safe here, we already lost the conversation." A pause. Then, almost casually, "Name's Miller. Before you ask, no rank that matters to you. I'm just the one they sent because I don't panic when the lights get loud." One of the bridge officers shifted. "Admiral, we should detain." Miller glanced at him. Not aggressively. Just acknowledging. And the officer stopped speaking mid-sentence, as if realizing detention was a concept that no longer applied in the room. Sareth noticed. "So," the Admiral said carefully, "this Doctrine Black, it is not a fleet formation. It is not a weapon system. It is not even a strategy." Miller nodded. "Good. You're catching on." Sareth's voice hardened. "Then explain it." Miller walked slowly toward the center of the bridge, looking at the holographic battlefield still flickering with collapsing Coalition assets. "Doctrine Black isn't something we use," he said. "It's something we become." A pause. "You ever have a species try to wipe you out?" he asked. No one answered. He nodded anyway. "Of course you have. You wouldn't be here otherwise." He pointed casually at the shattered fleet outside. "We stopped calling it defense a long time ago. Defense implies you go back to normal after." His eyes darkened slightly. "We don't go back." The silence on the bridge grew heavier. Even Sareth felt it now, that slow, uncomfortable realization that humanity's threat profile was not based on strength alone. It was based on persistence. Miller continued. "You saw our old systems wake up. That wasn't escalation. That was inventory." He tapped the side of his head. "We keep everything. Every war. Every mistake. Every trick. We don't forget anything that tried to kill us." A faint, humorless smile. "Turns out memory is a hell of a weapons industry." Outside the flagship, the human construct, the stitched monstrosity of orbital debris and forgotten stations, hovered like a patient executioner waiting for permission that would never be formally given. Coalition forces had stopped advancing entirely. Not from defeat. From recalculation overload. Sareth finally spoke again. "If you had intended extermination," he said carefully. We would already be gone. Miller nodded. Probably. A beat. But that's not the point. Sareth narrowed his eyes. Then what is? Miller looked at him for a long moment. Survival, he said simply. Then softer. And reputation. That word landed strangely in the alien mindscape. Sareth turned slightly. Reputation? Miller gestured outward, toward the void. Out there, he said. There are things that make your fleet look like a scouting party that got lost on the way to a proper war. A pause. You ever notice how predators behave differently when they know something worse is in the forest? Sareth didn't answer. Because the implication was obvious. And unpleasant. Miller exhaled. We didn't build Doctrine Black because we like using it, he said. We built it because at some point in our history, we realized the galaxy doesn't stop knocking just because you stop answering politely. A long silence. Then Sareth asked the question that mattered. Are you the reason no one has heard of humanity beyond this sector? Miller didn't deny it. That was answer enough. Outside, the Coalition fleet began to withdraw further, not in chaos now, but in structured retreat. The instinct for survival had shifted into something more delicate, reassessment. Sareth watched it happen, then spoke quietly. You are not defending a planet, he said. Miller shook his head. No. A pause. We're defending a threshold. The Admiral frowned. Explain. Miller's gaze drifted toward the stars beyond the broken fleet. There are species out there that don't negotiate. Don't conquer. Don't incorporate. A pause. They erase. The bridge fell silent again. Miller continued. We built our entire military philosophy around one idea. If something crosses that line, it doesn't get to do it twice. Sareth's mandibles tightened slightly. And where is this line? Miller smiled faintly. Wherever we are standing. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Sareth finally leaned back slightly in his command chair. And said something no Coalition admiral had ever said during an active engagement. Stand down. The bridge officers froze. Admiral. I said stand down. His voice was quieter now. We are not prepared for what comes after this battle. Miller watched him carefully. Smart call. Sareth glanced at him. Is this victory for you? Miller considered that. Then shrugged. No, he said. Victory implies it ends. A pause. We're just making sure it doesn't continue in the wrong direction. Outside, the human construct began to drift backward, slowly retracting its presence. Human ships mirrored it. Not fleeing. Resetting. As if the entire battle had been a controlled demonstration that had now reached its conclusion. Sareth noticed. This was a message, he said slowly. Miller nodded. Yeah. And what exactly was the message? Miller turned slightly before answering. Don't assume quiet means empty. A pause. And don't assume empty means safe. He walked back toward the airlock. Sareth called after him. If you are not here to conquer, he said, then why reveal yourself at all? Miller stopped. Didn't turn. His voice came softer now. Because you were never the threat. A beat. You were just the audience. And then he was gone. The airlock sealed. The shuttle detached. And humanity began to fade back into the darkness it had been pretending to occupy. Outside the flagship, the Coalition fleet continued its withdrawal, but now it did so differently. Carefully. Respectfully. Like something had finally taught it that the galaxy was not as simple as its records suggested. On the bridge, Sareth remained silent for a long time. Then he spoke quietly to no one in particular. Compile new classification, he said. His officers looked at him. He finished. Humanity, not pre-ascension. A pause. Not post-conflict. Another pause. Persistent. In the distance, Earth's sun glowed unchanged. Unimpressed. Unmoved. As if it had seen every version of this story before. And knew, with absolute certainty, that it would not be the last. Yendi,